So there's government failure and there's market failure. Government failure is far more prevalent.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with ReasonTV, and we're at FreedomFest in Las Vegas, and we're talking with Gene Epstein, economics columnist at Barron's. Thanks for talking to us, Gene. You have been working a lot on how the causes of the Great Recession are primarily coming from the government sector, not from a failure of capitalism. What's your prime piece of evidence for that?
Well, the prime piece of evidence, and by the way, my talk, which I just delivered, was called "The Failure of CRAPitalism," because I don't want to let off the crony capitalists, the people who supposedly operate in a profit and loss system, but who don't, who only know profits because their losses are protected.
What's an example of that?
Well, an example of that kind of person was Angelo Mozillo, who I gather is mentioned in a book called I Am John Galt, and he's typically, he was head of Countrywide, and he sold mortgages through much of his career to the federal government. He originated mortgages, sold them to the government. He wasn't a mortgage banker. He was just somebody who ran a government-created cash machine. Now, to get to your question about the evidence, and I've been writing a lot about this in Barron's, so many books on the subject are based on bad evidence, because amazingly, when you get down into the weeds, the evidence about the number of toxic mortgages that the government, in the person of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the Community Reinvestment Act, HUD independently, FHA, all of those toxic mortgages that blew up on us.
And that caused the recession.
Yes,
I mean,
that started in the early 90s, that caused a bubble, a 10-year bubble, a bull market that might have lasted a few years, lasted more than a decade, 12 years, 13 years. Then the crony capitalists got on the bandwagon. Prices could only go up. The toxic mortgages were being issued. It seemed like a good market to get into. But the evidence for that is hard to come by because there's been no truth in labeling.
Does capitalism create cronies? I mean, it's not that capitalism is the problem, but it creates the cronies who then destroy the system.
Well, there definitely are always capitalists. I mean, there used to be mercantilists. They wanted protection too. There are always capitalists who want cronies in Washington. That's the reason why we have to go back at least to the night watchman state. That makes that much less likely from happening.
That's your preferred way forward, which is to reduce the size and scope of government so that it can't affect markets in the way that it has been. Realistically, how is that going to happen?
Well, I think that, people have to read a book by Gillespie and I forget who else, called Declaration of Independence, that points the way. The only role I play at Barron's, I have potentially 1 million readers at Barron's, online and print, is to do my thing as an economist, to keep reminding them that we don't necessarily have to have a Federal Reserve. We don't have to, the last thing we want the government to do, by the way, is to be in charge of the money supply. I'd rather it be in charge of the shoe industry, even though the shoes would pinch. There would be far less chaos in the world if the Federal Reserve were abolished, or we at least have to limit it. So the only role I can play is to try to raise consciousness through lucid writing.
Are people more economically literate than they used to be? I mean, this is the first time we're having arguments about debt ceilings and about how mortgages work. I mean, is that the beginning of change?
Well, I wrote a book called Econospinning a few years ago because my more pessimistic slant was that actually when I started covering the economy for Barron's, that was when an explosion of interest began in economic issues. But unfortunately, that's also it was about 10 years later that that the New York Times hired their first economist to write a column in the person of Paul Krugman. So in my book, Econospinning, all of it could have been devoted to Krugman's gaffes. Several chapters were. So it may well be that the interest in economics has been so overwhelmed by the crackpot economics of certain types like Krugman that...
But wait, now you're calling a Nobel Prize winning economist a crackpot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Joseph Stiglitz, by the way, also won the Nobel Prize.
Another crackpot.
Joseph Stiglitz, the only thing in his world, this is what he won the Nobel Prize for. He won the Nobel Prize for arguing that there is asymmetric information in the market which leads to market failure. That was his key insight. There are lots of things that are laughable about that insight for which he won the Nobel Prize, but one of the things that's a little bit most ridiculous is that he didn't grasp the fact that when it comes to economic decision making, institutions always fail us. It's just that government institutions fail us far more often.
Well, we'll leave it here. Gene Epstein, economics columnist for Barron's, thanks for talking to us. For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.